Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to a new Finding Truth podcast. And this is part of the Marvels of the Quran series. And today I have with me the Faroos, who will be talking to us about miracles of the Quran, or linguistic miracles of the Quran, actually. So, Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
So first, I would like to introduce the Farouz to you. He's an ex-Christian, but he converted to Islam in 1990s. So it's like approaching 30 years in Islam now, right?
Getting there.
Yeah. So he has a very wonderful story for his journey from Christianity to many things in between, to studying so many religions, and eventually embarking on Islam and converting to Islam. So I would really recommend that you would actually look up his story, and I will put it in the description. He studied also, apart from being native English speaker, he also studied the Arabic language, so he's literate in Arabic, let's say. And he teaches some online courses on Usul al-Fiqh, and he is the host of Experience Islam with the Faroos channel, which has some pretty interesting material. So you also have its address in the ticker. So, and I'll also put it in the description. And I would recommend that you would go there and really subscribe to his channel. Pretty interesting one. So a couple of weeks back, I did actually an interview with him on his channel, and I premiered it on mine too. And I'm happy that he's with me today on Finding Truth. So, what are we going to talk about concerning the linguistics and the miracles of linguistics in the Quran?
So I put together this presentation on the structure and language of the Quran, and we're going to divide it into two parts. So we're going to get into the theory more today, and on part
Mhm.
two, we're going to do the application applied to Surah Al-Fatiha. And it's not going to be a complete application because that complete application would take hours. But that's what we're going to do. So by the end of the
Yeah.
presentation, you will know that the Quran has a specific structure, even though it appears to jump around at first glance. So many Westerners read the Quran and think, oh, it's jumping from this to this. I don't get it. It seems incoherent. But the Quran has a structure. It's known as a ring composition structure. And so, what is a ring composition and who used the structure?
Mm.
And then, who recognizes the ring composition structure of the Quran? Because it's not just recognized by Muslims, it's also recognized by Western academics as well. What is Iltifat? What is Balagha? And then we're going to get into, oh, and I didn't add to this, what is the structure of the Arabic language, the word structure. And we're gonna dive into the ocean of the Quran, and go into the Fatiha, the first chapter of the Quran, first surah of the Quran, letter by letter and word by word.
All right. So plenty of material. I think each of those points can be a presentation on its own, but let's have the condensed presentation this time, and maybe we'll expand on this later too.
So, what is a ring composition? Okay, a ring composition is a book, chapter, text, etc., where it's designed to come full circle. So, if we to break books, chapters, or texts apart, the first part connects to the last part, the second part connects to the second to last part, with a central theme connecting all parts together. Now, ring compositions may appear to jump around or be disjointed to those living in literate cultures because it's less commonly used now.
Mm.
However, it was more commonly used in oral cultures or partially literate cultures. For example, such as ancient Greece, I would consider it a partially literate culture because you had a highly educated literate group with also many, illiterate, people who were workers, farmers, etc. And as the ring composition structure is supposed to make text easier to memorize.
Wow. All right.
So the Quran has a ring composition structure. And I said it's been discovered in knowledge by both Muslim and Western academics. Indian scholars of the Quran, by Indian I'm referring to from India, known as Arabic as Hind, as well as Western academics. Now, it doesn't mean that other, backgrounds like Arabs, Persians, Africans didn't get into it, but, felt that the Indians dove deep into that topic. Now, for those interested in Western academic resources, there are a lot. However, I think that there is one that summarizes it better than others because it seems to focus more on that. And that is Structure and Quranic Interpretation by Raymond Farron. So the Quran ring composition structure is one large ring made up of 7 rings. Okay, and in each of the 7 rings, each chapter has a ringed pair with another, and finally each chapter is a ring. Now I got a question. Now, where does each ring start and end? And that is something I'll have to look up because I don't have that memorized, but it's something that I can look up and bring back in the future. Now, the last bullet was something that I thought of. It's not something I read or researched. It was just a connection that I made. That the first chapter of the Quran is considered a summary of the whole Quran, and its nickname is the 7 oft-repeated verses, right? And it's one chapter with 7 verses or 7 ayat, and the Quran is one ring with 7 rings within it. So I just, that was just a connection I made in, my research.
Yeah. This is a very good connection. Actually, I did plenty of work on Surah Al-Fatiha myself. Never published it, but it's a very, very valid and insightful point, actually. Yeah.
And same here. I wrote probably over 100 pages on Surah Al-Fatiha. Never published it. So
maybe it's time for both of us.
Maybe.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to use one example. This one was just easy to find because I can copy and paste it. So I didn't there are many other examples, but I would, had to put in a lot of time typing them by hand, which I'm not opposed to doing, but, that would take a much long, on short preparation, I felt that this was more sufficient. So if we look at Surah Al-Baqarah by itself, right, it starts with faith versus unbelief, then it ends with faith versus unbelief. So it's got A and A prime. B goes to Allah's creation and knowledge, second, and then second to last, Allah's creation and knowledge. Right, and then you see deliverance of the law to the children of Israel, then the deliverance of the law to the Muslims. And you got Abraham was tested, and Muslims will be tested. And the Kaaba is the new Qibla, the new prayer direction. And so that brings, that's like a central theme because, what the surah is going from is, how the previous nations were chosen to be giving major revelations. And then you're seeing, so you learn from the past and then you see into the future. And then that, that the Kaaba being the new Qibla is, brings that, central focus. So this is just one example. So in Raymond Farron's book on pages 75 to 79 is Appendix A, and he goes into more examples of this. So for example, and then also he goes into, so that was just a ring of one surah. So it's, the Quran is one big ring with seven sub rings inside of it. And then within those 7 rings, each surah has a pair that rings with it. And then each individual surah is its own ring. So, this is very, so when people say, the Quran is, incoherent, or that Uthman just put and the Sahaba just put the Quran together in a haphazard order. You don't get this level of structure from a haphazard order, right?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And actually, what you have mentioned about Surah Al-Baqarah, if we can go back one slide, is a huge example, because Surah Al-Baqarah, for those who are listening to us, is of course the largest surah in the Quran in terms of the amount of pages it occupies, or the number of words or letters, and to have this kind of structure, starting with ألف لام ميم ذلك الكتاب لا ريب فيه هدى للمتقين, and then discerning believers, non-believers, and munafiqeen, etc., from each other, and then ending with the last two ayat, which is آمن الرسول بما أنزل إليه من ربه والمؤمنون, and talks again about faith, etc. And then also the structure that you're mentioning, Surah Al-Baqarah talks about the story of Adam in the beginning, and then repeats about creation and knowledge again at the end, and then Abraham and the children of Israel, as you're saying, and then reflecting also on the Muslims, and telling the story of Israel, and then using the story to then, when he refers back to Muslims that we can relate, we don't want to follow the same path, etc. And then we have the test of Abraham and Ismail alayhi salam, and then that Muslims will be tested. And then in the middle, as you say, the change of the Qibla, and as if this is now the change of the Qibla. So if you are looking for faith, if you are looking for Huda, then look to that Qibla, God's creation and knowledge, etc. And then you would go to the Qibla also for his for the knowledge, etc. And the law, part of the law, is actually looking towards the Qibla. And then you have the Salah, and then you have all the obligations other than that. And Ibrahim is the one who has actually built the Kaaba, and he's just beside it. And then the other side of the surah is like the mirror image. And it's really a beautiful thing to notice, and that this happens in so many of the surahs, if not all of them, unless some surahs actually work together in harmony to form a bigger ring, etc. Is something that is definitely part of the miraculous structure for the Quran. So thank you for showing this. And I think many of the audience can have the assignment of doing their own work of finding this ring structure, because it also has a different level of meaning, I think. Would you agree to that?
Yes. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. One of the things that and for like non-Muslim audiences, so I wasn't always a Muslim, right? And so a lot of times being born into a faith, you have a natural bias, right? When we all do. And so, but when you come from the outside and people are making arguments, let's say, against Muslims, you can see that, okay, some arguments, okay, that makes sense. Some arguments make absolutely no sense. And so, one of the things that I had done, in my head is kind of divide, upon after entering Islam, things into matters of fact and matters of faith. And so a matter of fact is something that would be something that there are external sources to verify, right? So, for example, we have historical sources on the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that he lived, he died, etc. Right? So this would be a matter of fact. Okay.
Yeah.
Whereas Ibrahim or Abraham alayhi salam, there are no external sources outside of Scripture. So believing in the existence of Abraham is a matter of faith, right? So matters of fact can be believed by everyone from the the atheist to the Muslim, right? And they can arrive at that conclusion. Matters of faith, the existence of Abraham, is a scripture-based belief. So And sometimes I see people getting in these debates over Abraham, I kind of think it's not the best use of time, like, because but when people are arguing over, did the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam exist? Well, there's enough, you know, historical resources by both Muslim and non-Muslim sources, like, to demonstrate that. So there are certain arguments that are just bad arguments. And so one of the things, I'm going to tie this into the Quran, because even when I was not a Muslim, right, I could appreciate the literary structure of the Quran, the linguistic structure of the Quran. And it's like, whether or not you believe it came from God or not, whether or not you believe it came from Allah or not, whether, there are certain things, like, and as we get into this presentation, even if I were not a Muslim, like, I would still be really impressed with the things that I'm about to present. And so, and I can say that because I've been on both sides of the fence, right? So.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So you're inviting people who are even not Muslims to go and check out the literary structure of the Quran and judge for themselves if this is a book that lends itself to the ultimate use of language in a very rhetorical way that really delivers meaning in a special way.
So I brought, so I was talking about the pairs. So 2 and 3, Surah Al-Baqarah and Imran, are a pair. So they make up a ring together, but then they have both their own ring as well. So we find Surah 12 and 13, Surah 50 and 51, Surah 50, and those are just examples. Because the author of the book is writing a book, like, he's writing this, to just give the overview and idea. He's not going to go into every single thing. Now, a Muslim scholar might do that because, it's their belief, but a Western academic is just trying to, share the idea with their audience, their courses, their classes.
Yeah.
So we're going to get into something called Iltifat, which is something also that I found impressive. So there's a Western misconception that the Quran has grammatical errors. The problem with this contention is that it's anachronistic. So for those who don't know what anachronistic is, it means like out of time and place. And so the rules of Arabic grammar were not invented until 1 to 2 centuries after the Quran, right? So to say it broke a rule that didn't exist at the time just doesn't make much sense to me. And like, so I use this analogy for those, I really enjoy American football, At one time I was good at it, even though that time is long past. But like, I'll enjoy watching it. So, American football used to be played, back in the 1800s, late 1800s. And the rules have been constantly changing. So the rules of the 2020s have a different set of rules. So if we were to like go watch a game in the 1890s and say, hey, see, these guys are breaking the rules. No, they're not. The rules didn't exist. And I try my best. I do think all human beings on some level, I talk about double standard methodology versus single standard methodology. So I think we all try our best. We all should try our best to apply a single standard methodology. It's not going to be possible 100% of the times because we're human beings, but that's what we should strive for. A double standard is when you have one standard for one group of people or one text, and then a different standard that you don't apply. And I find that some of those who criticize Islam, definitely with double standard methodology. I'm not going to say all, but the founding fathers of the United States, where I'm from, so they wrote documents in founding their countries. And in those documents, sometimes they would spell words 2 to 3 different ways, or multiple ways. right, in the same document. And these were highly educated people, right? So are we going to say they can't spell? Yeah, like, and they were writing documents that were supposed to be preserved, right? But no, like, we can't go by our spelling rules of today and say that, well, Thomas Jefferson, he didn't know how to spell. Right? I mean, like, whether or not you agree with him, like, his ideas, you can't take away the fact that he was a brilliant man and he knew the language, right? Absolutely. I mean, he had his issues with, like, maybe morally, right? He might have had his issues faith wise, but the whole idea of, like, now of, like, canceling people, like, every human being on this earth does good and bad, and so you can't take away the people's good points because of their weak points. You accept people as they are, with
the good and the bad,
good points and the good and bad. Now, I know in the majority creed of the Muslims, the prophets cannot commit wrong actions. That's the majority creed. There is a minority creed that does allow for minor wrong actions, but that's a small minority. So when I say all human beings, that's a generalization. So now, many of what are referred to as grammatical errors are known as iltifat in Arabic, which is grammatical shift. Now, the Quran is not the only text to use this literary device. It was also used in pre-Islamic poetry, ancient Greek literature, not all ancient Greek literature, but some, and also by oral cultures. It's a more common technique used in oral cultures. Now, to the best of my knowledge, the Quran uses it more than any document, but I have not tested that claim. It's merely a hypothesis, so it may be right or may be wrong. Now, the power of iltifat on oral cultures is often lost on us today, especially those of us who've watched movies like Pulp Fiction. And I'm not recommending anyone watch that if you haven't, but for those of us, who might come from another generation or might have, converted or might be non-Muslim. Quentin Tarantino, the director, tries to use similar device, not a literary device, but a pictorial device, and apply them to film. So you see, like, it will all of a sudden it'll shift. Like, you'll be in one time period and boom, you're in another. You'll be in one location and boom, you're another. So that is the best example of how I can portray the impact of it, the effect. Now, for those who like to, look for reasons to criticize, I'm not comparing the Quran to Pulp Fiction. I'm merely trying to paint a picture in people's heads, because that movie was powerful to people when it came out because of the shifts. So iltifat as a literary device to oral cultures is powerful to them because of the shift. So the sudden shifts have a shocking effect in oral cultures who listen attentively to recitations. And there's also iltifat in Surat Al-Fatiha. So here, their types of iltifat are, change in person between first, second, third, which is the most common. It's usually divided into 6 kinds. And you got change in number between singular, dual, plural, change in addressee, change in the tense of a verb, change in the case marker, using noun in place of pronoun. I found a good article and put it in here, that goes more in English, that goes more into detail. If you're looking for Arabic, one I know of is the Itqan of Jalaluddin Sayuti goes into it. I believe that has been translated into English. It's hard to find, it's hard to get, but if you search for it. But anyone who wants, they can go there and they could read more about this. Now, the effects of iltifat. Iltifat can draw a listener near and shock one by making one feel far away. So the Quran was revealed to a primarily oral culture. So what we know about our senses, right, is that oral cultures, you know, tend to be like they tend to listen like more attentively because that's the primary way they're getting information, right?
Mm,
So people learn to memorize better, word for word, more and more, you know. And then when people get to books, right, and things are preserved, well, they don't need to memorize as much because it's there. Um, and also the new skill of reading, takes away. It's kind of like if someone loses their sight, their hearing gets better quite often. I mean, unless
mm,
it's due to age, but in general, when you lose one sense, the others get stronger. So the same thing in the oral cultures, is listening, it's memorization, but also when you listen, it's more powerful impact um, on people. And so then you get into the books, it takes away and new skills develop. And now we're in, a computer technology, television age. So the oral culture doesn't have as much of an impact, but as on us today, but maybe certain television might, certain computer things might, because every new skill we gain, some are lost. It's just part of being human. So
yeah.
iltifat can make the listener feel distant and then all of a sudden draw one close. Additionally, different ahruf and kira'at of the Quran may have some different iltifat, which may change the effect. And so to get a complete understanding of the Quran, really reading in all those ahruf and kira'at, but that's for a more in-depth study. It's not something I recommend for the person just picking it up for the first time. Just like I don't recommend, calculus to someone who hasn't learned algebra.
Mm,
Um, Now, there are certain geniuses who are rare who can, but, I'm talking about for the average everyday. Now, iltifat is a literary device, calls attention to a point, and maybe I should get rid of the word is. I thought I got rid of that. May be intended to awe the listener.
mm,
So iltifat can convey, and I just use six moods. There are more, but I'm not going to be able to find every single one, you know, um, by myself, right?
yeah.
So power, fear, emphasis, honor, majesty, the change in mood. So when you see an iltifat, it's actually meant to stir that emotion, right?
Mm,
So sometimes it's made to make the listener feel that the speaker is more powerful.
yeah.
Sometimes it's made the listener to feel fear. Sometimes it's made the listener has to understand that the speaker is emphasizing a point. Sometimes it's actually, instead of fear, making you feel honored, um, or making you like feel the majesty and awe of the speaker, or sometimes change your mood, right? Go from sad to happy, happy to sad, like etc. But it's intentionally designed to stir emotions, and it's very powerful in oral cultures. Now, I want to get into balaga and rhetoric.
I have a comment on this last point also about the grammar in the Quran.
Mhm.
If you'd allow me. So
Mhm.
essentially, the Quran was addressing people who were very strong in the Arabic language. It's an oral tradition, as you are saying. So if anybody knew about the classical Arabic language and how to do constructs and how to be really delivering the message in the best way, it will be the people of Quraysh who Prophet Muhammad was addressing them.
So,
So, yeah, and the Arabic grammar was actually constructed a couple of centuries later. Yet, one of the major sources for constructing Arabic grammar rules was actually by referring to the Quran itself. So were two sources primarily: the Quran and the classical Arabic poetry, Shar al-Jahili. and the way Arabs, native Arabs, were speaking the Arabic language, Fusha, for like the first, I think, 150 years after the deliverance of the Quran. But the Quran and the classical poetry were the main thing. So if the people who were saying the classical poetry, Sha'ir al-Jahili, which was the highest level of rhetoric deliverance of meaning, and who were essentially talking the classical Arabic as their normal day-to-day conversation, with all the grammar built into that from childhood to grave, then I think people in this age have no right whatsoever to point to any of this thing, because if somebody had the right to say it, it would have been those people who were sitting there listening to the Quran, fishing for any mistake for the Prophet, who was telling them, this is the Quran, that you cannot make anything like it. So if he had a mistake there, they would be the first one to point out, say, how are you saying that we cannot make like it, and you don't even construct it correct grammatically? So I think there is actually no point in doing that, whether by Western or even native Arabs today, to go there. It's a dead end.
So we actually just had a muwafaqat, because I'm actually going to be doing a talk on my channel within a couple days, but I'm going to be examining certain arguments that don't make sense. And part of the reason that some of them don't make sense is because, you know, people would have brought certain things up at that time, right? Like,
absolutely.
Yeah. So in this next slide, so myself and Brother Ahmed are going to do this together. So this presentation is geared towards an English speaking audience. And this next slide, there's really no totally effective way to explain in English, but I'm doing my best shot at it. And Brother Ahmed is going to follow up after I say, and he's going to give examples in the Arabic language. So this is just one example of balagha. So balagha translates as rhetoric. Now there can be multiple ways to say the same thing that have different meanings that are not obvious from the text if one is not familiar with rhetorical devices. So I'm going to say 3 sentences. Mike went to the park. Verily, Mike went to the park. And then verily, Mike went to the park for certain. Now, for certain, it really should be in brackets. But if we see, like if I were reading this without knowing balagha, and not that I know balagha, but without knowing the balagha that I know, because I'm not even close to being a master by any sense of the imagination. I know a little. So with the little I know, without knowing that, I would just get the same meaning from all 3 of these sentences. I wouldn't assume anything. Okay. But when at the structure of the sentence in Arabic, we know the audience of the speaker. So, right. So when I'm just saying Mike went to the park, I'm speaking to an audience that trusts me and is not really doubting what I'm saying. Okay. But then if I say inna, verily, Mike went to the park, right? Adding that inna tells me, or that verily tells me, that the audience asked a question, but they had doubt. So they weren't certain. So the first group, Mike just went to the park, that's speaking, they might have asked a question and they already, they trust the answer. So I don't need to say anything more than Mike went to the park. But to say verily Mike went to the park, I'm speaking to an audience that's asking a question out of sincerity, but has doubts. So you're speaking to skeptics, right? That they don't necessarily believe bad things about you, but they have doubts about what you're saying, like doubts that you know what you're talking about. So then the third, verily, Mike went to the park for certain. See, I really couldn't find a really good direct English translation. But if you start the sentence with inna, and then you put the prefix li, which is the Arabic letter lam with a kasra underneath, in front of the last word of the sentence. If that combination is there, you know that the people asking the question, they're asking the question, but they're not asking the question sincerely trying to know the answer, right? Like they are, they could be mocking you. They think you're wrong. They're not like, and they're not even trying to hear what you say. They're asking it like, we have a, I'm not going to use so we have a phrase in English, smart behind, right? Like it's not technically smart behind, it's, inappropriate. But so the people in that third category, it's addressing the people who are smart behinds. So Ahmed, did you want to add to that for the Arabic speaking audience, better examples? You're muted.
Okay, so for example, we can say, for example, Muhammad Musafir or Mike Musafir. So it means that Muhammad is traveling. And then we say, so this is just a statement of fact. And then we say, Inna Muhammad Musafir. So in this case, there is an inna, which means verily Muhammad or verily Mike is traveling. And then we want to even put more emphasis to remove any shred of doubt. So we'd say, Inna Mike la Musafir, for example. So added the lam before Musafir. So it means verily Mike is certainly traveling. So it's a second or a third level of stating the fact, just the pure fact, and then the inna, and then the lam. So it addresses the doubts or addresses the audience with a higher level of emphasis, if you'd like to say. Yeah.
Thank you.
So yeah, so we can. So if that makes it a little bit clearer. But yeah. All right.
Yeah. So this, I already explained verbally. So we're going to get into the structure of pre-classical and classical Arabic. So almost all Arabic words come from a root word consisting of 3 consonants. Now, in rare cases, there could be 2 consonants or 4 consonant root words. And I'm not sure, maybe more, as well. I just, can't think of any at the moment. But if there are, and Ahmed knows any, maybe you can add that. Derivatives of the roots have connections to that root words. In almost all cases, the meanings are interconnected. When we can't find a connection, generally we just say it's lost, meaning that there was a connection at one time and we just, lost that. Additionally, the letters of the root words have meanings which connect to the word. So every letter has a meaning. And also they're inverse roots. So inverse roots are often connected as well, not 100% of the time, but often. So for example, if I take the Arabic letters Ain, Lam, Mim, that's the root for knowledge, right? But if I do Ain, Mim, Lam, so I inverse the Lam and the Mim, it's the root word for actions. So for this one, actually, the Quran specifically provides the connection by teaching us that knowledge precedes action.
Interesting. Very. Yeah.
Now, finally, there are the diacritical roots. Okay, so diacritical is what we're referring to is marks on top of the letters. So my example here is actually a little inaccurate. So we're not going to use my example, but the principle of what I'm saying still applies. I, literally caught this mistake an hour ago. If that. And so I didn't have time to go find a better example in between. Inshallah, maybe in future or next time. But in pre-classical Arabic letters, they may have been written without diacritical marks. So therefore, the letter fa and qaf would look the same to the reader, and the reader would have to know. Like, so reading classical Arabic, the reader needed like way more advanced level of reading level than the average person of today.
Yeah.
We have it easy. First off, with movable type, with the diacritical marks, in some cases the vowels, right? Like, so we have it much easier. They had to work harder when it came to literary text. So the Arabic letter fa has one dot above it. The Arabic letter qaf has two dots above it. But in many of the pre-classical, they had no dots above it, and the reader just had to know by reading the sentence, by the context, which it is. So diacritical roots may also be interconnected as well. So I use an example, qaf, ra, alif, associated with reading and reciting, and then fa, ra, alif. So my connection here is a mistake. However, the principle still applies that root words that would have looked the same in pre-classical Arabic are often interconnected as well.
Actually, I have an example that we can use to make that clear, and
Great.
sometimes even this would be used in qira'at. The Quran uses that in different qira'ah for the same ayah. So, for example, in Surah Al-Hujurat, it says, "Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu, in ja'akum fasiqun binaba'in fatabayyanu." Okay? So, all who you have believed, if there comes to you a disobedient person or somebody who does sins, fasiq, with information, investigate. So, tabayyanu is look further into it, okay, before taking a judgment on a piece of news that's coming from somebody who is known for lying, for example, or known for misconduct. And then in another qira'ah, it says, فَتَثَبَّتُوا. And tabayyanu and tathabbatu, the way the word is written in classical Arabic is exactly the same. The difference is in the dots, in the diacritics. So tathabbatu means reconfirm it. Okay, maybe find a different source of the information, try to find independent sources of the information to make sure that this is not a fabricated piece of news. So make an investigation. And then the other one says also to fatabayanu and fatathabbatu. And the marvel of this is that the Quran in different qira'at uses this diacritical difference in the build-up of a certain structure of a word to give different meanings in different qira'at, and those different meanings would reconfirm and enrich the original meaning in many cases. And of course, the Quran is an oral tradition by definition, because the Prophet himself was unlettered. And فَإِذَا قَرَأْنَاهُ فَاتَّبِعْ قُرْآنَهُ. So it's primarily a recitation, and this is how, and it's a very rigorous memorization system for the Quran, with every single bit of it being preserved. So the difficulty of recognizing the diacritics, etc., was not there for those who memorized it by heart. But the very structure of the Arabic language itself, as you have very smartly pointed out, enables, it's as if the Arabic language is built, lending itself to the Quran using those features, so that the single ayah can deliver many meanings, for example, and the same word and its reflection in another way, like ilm and amal, etc., have those relations between them to deliver meanings that are sometimes reconfirmatory meanings, and sometimes pointing out relations between meanings.
Now, thank you for that. And I'm actually going to be speaking on my next episode on my channel. That's part of the topic, is going to be on the ahruf and qira'at.
All right.
Yeah, and so one of the I lost my train of thought, but one of the so I brought up earlier, said I was a non-Muslim, at one time, and this is like one of the things, even as a non-Muslim, whether or not you believe, um, the Quran is the word of God or not, the richness, the depth, the structure of the language is so it's so impressive. So it's like, I sometimes get these like the trolls who are saying like they'll say negative things about Muslims, and it'll be like, Muslim and a scholar are an oxymoron, which is a really a bigoted comment. But in my head, I'm always thinking, about these people. Like, well, why don't you just start with attempting to learn classical Arabic, and then after that, come back and tell me that statement.
Absolutely. Actually, I was having a semi conversation with somebody today on social media, and he's just saying those things, and I thought the best answer was exactly what you've just said. Why don't you just go and learn a little bit more? Because having the conversation at that level of ignorance is just losing the point. Absolutely,
Yeah.
totally agree with you.
So this next pre-classical and classical Arabic is conceptual language that creates images in one's head when studying, and this really ties back to the oral tradition. So when studying the Quran, as well as other pre-classical texts, one needs to look at the root words along with their derivatives, inverse root words and their derivatives, diacritical root words along with their derivatives, and the meaning of letters. Because, the Quran and the pre-Islamic Arabs were very deliberate in their word choice, in their writing. So even, like the people who were not Muslim, they were non-Muslim poets, they were still very deliberate. Like they chose a word for a reason and put it in a sentence based upon the images. So in Arabic literature, classical Arabic literature, as well as pre-classical Arabic literature, you would have to do that. Now, after looking at all of those things together, you can get a conceptual and pictorial framework of the ayat you are studying when referencing the Quran. And if we were referring to the pre-Islamic period, you do things for lines of poetry to really understand what the poet was trying to say. Now, modern Arabic writers do not, do like are not as deep now, right? I mean, you're not going to get this depth from a tweet.
Not even near to it. Not even near to it. Actually, poets today who are really poets by the definition of the period that the prophet came. I don't think if they go back in time they will really consider them poets, because the structure of what is called poetry in Arabic, you have to follow a certain bahr, and there is this structure. You cannot just write anything that has rhyme and call it poetry. This is not the definition of poetry in Arabic, really. So yeah, it's a very elaborate art.
So this next question, because one of the critiques that some people bring against the Quran is, the Quran states that it's clear and understandable Arabic as stated in the following ayat, 16:103 and 26:195. However, scholars such as Jalaluddin As-Suyuti, I believe it was in his Itqan, recognize that there are words of Persian, Hebrew, Syriac, Coptic, and Abyssinian origin, etc. So I'll give you an example. Firdaus. Firdaus has origins in Persian. So how can this be? Okay, and if this gets back to our statement at the beginning, if this is, or not beginning, the middle, If this is so, why did the opponents of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam bring this up in their list of or not bring this up? I meant to say in their list of contentions that the Quran addresses, because they brought up a lot of points to argue against the Quran, but they never brought up that it has foreign words. Why? So how can there be words of foreign origin? The Quran say it's clear Arabic and no one can test this. Well, the answer is actually very simple. The words originated in other languages, but were part of the Arabic language decades or centuries before the Quran. So I use, so like I said, the opponents contested his claims, the Prophet's claims, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. However, they never contested the presence of these words. If something were off, they would have beaten people to this. Right? They would have beaten us to this in these arguments, and we would see ayat in the Quran addressing these arguments. Additionally, this is a feature of all languages. So people meet with each other via trade, travel, warfare, etc., and exchange ideas. And exchange ideas leads to exchange of words, and we're doing this all the time in our modern world.
Yeah.
So if I were to write a book now, okay, and state that I have written a book in clear, understandable English, right? Then I write in the book, I write the phrases, love is like a rodeo, and I parked the car, okay? Now the word rodeo is a loan word from Spanish. The word park is a loan word from Arabic. Now, both have been part of the English language for so long that the average English speaker is not even aware that these were not part of the original English language. So would anyone legitimately argue that my book is not clear, understandable English if I said I parked the car after listening to the song Love is Like a Rodeo? Right? Would any reasonable person say that? No.
Of course not.
And so this is an example of what I call a double standard methodology, where one applies a standard to the Quran in Arabic language that they do not apply to the texts in their own language.
Absolutely. And there are so many actually words in English that come from Arabic, like even words used in military, like admiral, for example, which comes from Amir al-Bahr, for example, in Arabic, etc., etc. But if somebody says, I'm following the instructions of the admiral, somebody cannot object to him and tell him, for example, why don't you talk straight English or something? Yeah, because this is the word. You don't have another word for it. It's just become part of the English language. This is how it is. Yeah.
And like I said, coming from a non-Muslim background and converting to Islam, there are certain arguments that, so for example, I'm married to an Arab woman, and she'll who's been Muslim her whole life, raised Muslim, certain arguments she would say that makes absolutely no sense. So whereas having been a non-Muslim and being an American, I could see why a person thinks that. I could, but then there are others that to me are just dumb. They're intentionally geared towards people who are fans that don't think. And so these arguments that I brought up, about the foreign words, the grammar errors, this, that, all you have to do is think, and they don't make sense.
Absolutely.
So we're going to stop here because this is going to be the start of the next part. So,
Mike, this has been just great going through this, and the novelty here is that you are a person who is an American, a native English speaker or American speaker, and it drew your attention. Again, I would really recommend that people would listen to you saying your story and how you looked into you followed the Bible, and then you wanted to follow God's instructions, and then later you looked into the Quran, and after being your attention drawn to the fact that the Quran has all those instructions already, etc. And now, obviously, other things in the Quran drew your attention too. And it is the case that the Quran asks people to look at the Quran as a miraculous text, as a divine text. So it really strikes me that if somebody wants to be fair to himself, he would really look for the good arguments, not the fake arguments. Otherwise, he will fend himself off, right? Just close the door, doesn't even look what's inside, just by looking into those sometimes unbelievable, whether being anachronistic or biased toward a certain modern point of view, or not considering the fact that Arabic of the Quran was examined by the people who really knew the Arabic, etc. So thank you for the very interesting presentation. And just as a teaser for the coming installment, so Faroos will be talking to us about his insights into the first surah in the Mus'haf, the first surah in the Quran, in the final order of the Quran, which is Surah Al-Fatiha, which is a very important surah. Muslims actually recite Al-Fatiha in every rak'ah, in every prayer. So at least we recite it during the day, twice in the morning, 4 times in Dhuhr, 4 times in Asr, 3 times in Maghrib, and 4 times in Isha. And there has to be something special about it, right? It has the gist of the whole Quran. It's a very condensed piece of meaning. So I'm looking forward to that. And by that, I'll say to everybody, first, thank you very much, and Jazakallah khairan to the Faroos.
It was a pleasure.
Thank you very much. And to everybody, please like this video, subscribe to his channel, and have a look at some of his great content. And I'm looking forward to see you again on the upcoming episode, Mike.
And thank you. I'm looking forward to it as well.